traditionally, the assessment seemed a bit disconnected with the actual role. And if anything, an assessment, can come across a friction.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, it's Ben Eubanks, host of We're Only Human. Our research shows that employers in the last year have put a lot more emphasis on things like minimizing bias in the hiring process. And one of the best ways to do that is through the use of something like an assessment. Right? It gives you insights into candidates, and especially those insights that aren't easily observable during the interview. Right? Very objective, not so subjective like we happen to be as humans. And today we're going to dig into some of the conversation on what's happening with assessments, and in that industry as a whole, what's happening there, some of the transformation. I'm really excited to dig into this and understand more about it myself. And I hope that you come prepared to take some notes because we're going to learn some good stuff today. Here to share with us some of those insights is Jora Gill. He's the Chief Digital Officer at SHL. Welcome, Jora.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So just to give everybody a little bit of insights into who they're listening to for the next half hour or so, tell us a little about who you are and what you do.
So, as you said, I'm Jora Gill. I've been with SHL a couple of years. I'm the Chief Digital Officer, and Chief Digital Officers come in different forms in different organizations. At SHL, we like to sort of look at it as a sort of digital as a sort of combined entity of our research and development around, assessment space, our engineering teams, our product teams, our product marketing teams, and our project management office teams. So it's a holistic view of what we define as digital. And I can go into, what our objectives are in the digital team. Prior to joining SHL, I was the Chief Digital Officer for The Economist, the newspaper, where we were going through a journalistic content transformation. And prior to that, I've held technology roles. So I was a Chief Technology Officer at various organizations such as Reed Elsevier and Standard & Poor's.
Awesome. Excellent. I can't remember if I told you this when we had the chance to meet last year in person, but it was being an economist was like my backup career choice because I love the statistics world and everything else. And I'm always curious about human behavior. So maybe we share that connection somewhere in our background where you've done some work at The Economist. And it's one of those things I've always been connected to. That's fun. So tell us a little about SHL as a company. What do they do for some people that might not be as familiar with the world of technology, the world of assessments? Give them a little bit of insight into kind of the scope of the company and the work that the team does.
Yeah, sure. So SHL, we've been around for nearly 40 years now, and started off, and we can get into what assessments are, but started off in a sort of traditional psychometric assessments. And those were assessments really using the industrial and occupational psychology to look at people's traits. So those traits would be around behaviors and personalities and cognitive ability. So really the focus was a bunch of very smart PhD, R&D folks who'd started the organization who wanted to look at assessments in a different way. At that point in 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, the internet was really coming into its own. So, we were moving away from pen and pencil and moving towards, how do you do assessments online? Obviously, those innovations have now moved on with the advent of mobile technologies and now the advent of big data and AI. So SHL have, held a lot of information and data on benchmarks across the globe, what makes a great project manager in the UK versus a great project manager in the US. Could they be the same to people? Could they be the same traits? So they use these benchmarks really to understand global roles, local roles in geographies, or right down to industry type roles, project manager in retail versus a project manager in software engineering may be different. So SHL have sort of two arms to them, essentially, if I was sort of boiling it down and really simplifying it. One is around talent acquisition. How can we help organizations hire the right campus graduate fit for their needs? How can we help organizations hire the right managerial and leadership roles that we need in the 21st century? How can we hire the right professional technology or sales folks, or the first entry level or volume level types of individuals working maybe in retail or hospitality? So that's one area, talent acquisition, where we help organizations, which is really changing, and we can delve a bit deep in the trends we're seeing in this space. The other area is talent management. So how can we help you not only develop your talent, but what leadership skills do you need given the changing face of organizations in terms of technology coming in and disrupting many organizations or creating new opportunities? So what's the future for talent management when it comes to leaders of the future? How can employees develop themselves in this new world? What's going to happen with Generation Z or Z and the millennials? Because we know they operate slightly different in terms of their expectations of the workforce. So those are sort of two broad areas, but we do connect those together. So as you're acquiring new talent that's joining your organization, how do you make the onboarding experience really engaging and exciting? So that's the sort of overall SHL in essence.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Again, I follow the company and the work the team has done for quite a while, but for those people that don't spend their time reading up on the assessment space, I want to make sure they had a good understanding of the different capabilities there. And again, we're definitely going to talk about hiring, but if we have time, I want to wrap back into that talent management piece, because I think that's a increasingly interesting point of view and conversation that employers need to be thinking about hiring, not just for the job you can do today, but for the adaptability and the ability to do a job in the future. So let's level set on assessments a little bit for the sake of the audience. What's the state of the industry look like today? What's the general sense you're getting from the buyers, the prospects, the companies that you're working with that are looking for assessments, the things they're using? Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing out there with your broad perspective.
Sure. So organizations today are, looking in assessments, I would say sort of in three broad areas if we just focused on the assessment. One is, do we have the right skills? So, as an organization, and we know skills are changing constantly, do we have the right skills, and can we assess for the right skills? Those could be sort of coding type skills or language type skills or, nursing skills. Do we have the right skills for our needs as an organization? The second area organizations are focused on, as well as the skills, do we have the right behaviors that we require in our organization? So do we have the right personalities, the right competencies that we're looking for within our unique organization, the uniqueness of our clients' needs? And the final area comes across as people's knowledge or expertise. Can we assess for, the previous knowledge of an individual that they, could bring to our organization that we may have gaps in? So predominantly it's three areas. So the skills assessment, the sort of behavioral or personality assessments, and then the sort of knowledge. Does a person have the right experience? Do they have the right cognitive ability? Are they good at sort of solving problems if we need that requirement within the organization? So those are the three broad areas that we assess for.
So one of the questions that I get sometimes, or one of the conversations that I have with employers that are thinking about assessments, is they automatically assume, okay, if I'm going to use an assessment in the hiring process, it's going to bog things down. It's going to slow down the process. It's going to mean that the candidates aren't going to have this seamless experience, and they're not going to appreciate that or enjoy that. And so they'll just kind of bail out. So they feel like they're setting themselves up. There's two mutually exclusive categories. There's a great candidate experience on one side, and on the other, there's an assessment with all the validity and the science behind that. Can they have both of those, or is it still very much, you made the joke a minute ago about pen and paper at one point, right? Being the way of doing that. Today, it's a little bit more modern, a little more intuitive, I would guess, but can they have both of those, or is it still a choice they're having to make between a good experience and having a very valid and objective assessment of someone's abilities?
They can have both. And the assessment space has really moved on. I think I take your point that traditionally the assessment seemed a bit disconnected with the actual role. And if anything, given sort of the low levels of unemployment we see, in the world right now, an assessment, and clients have said this to me, can come across a friction. And whereas on one side, you work really hard to find the candidate and, you want them to join, and then you get sort of an assessment that seems a bit disjointed from the role. We've spent quite a bit of time in looking in 3 areas around the assessment, and I think we've got something quite unique. So on one side, you're quite right. You've got to attract the right candidate, and that really goes to brand. And it's not traditionally where assessment players have played, but we think it's really important that to your point, that the assessment doesn't sort of then come left field once a candidate has actually understood the brand. So it should be part of the process. The next one, candidates really want to learn about your organization. Why would I sort of even go as far as taking assessment? The final one is the assessment has to be part of the engagement process. So it has to be relevant for the role that people are applying for. But the way, and we talk about this internally quite often, the way, thanks to sort of social media and sort of digital technologies, the way people apply for roles has significantly changed over the years. So, we used to call this initially as the linear model. So you used to, see a job or, a job role on a job board. You would understand what the job is about. You may then talk to a recruiter. And then you may apply for the role by sending your resume or your CV. And then you would be assessed, and then you would decide. And that used to be the linear way of working. What we're seeing right now, why the whole model is changing, in the digital model, we're seeing people just apply for multiple roles, and some of them may not even be looking for a new job, but they still just apply for something that may interest them. Then they get contacted by a recruiter, and they're trying to remember, what was this job that I applied for if I just did it online? Then they try to understand about the job, so the recruiter would then send you a job specification, and they understand the role, and then they formally apply and be assessed if they're actually engaged in the role. So I think the way of work and the way of applying is changing, and assessments are changing. So we now do something called outcome-based assessments, which are more relevant to help businesses hire the right people and for the candidates to get an experience of what the actual job role that they'll be working in. So Ben, you may have seen a trend over the past few years where gamification had really come into the assessment. We find it strange at SHL that you would do a gamify experience of something that's completely unrelated to the job that's actually at hand. You could be, bursting balloons based on something, but what we want to do is create an experience for the candidates of organizations to say, look, imagine if you're a candidate and you're a graduate or you just left a university, and you've got your first assignment, and then your first assignment is to meet the CFO of a organization that you're a consultant for. And then you could sort of meet the CFO, and you would be asked questions around problem solving or numerical type questions that are very relevant to the situation you find yourself. Next, you could be sort of meeting the chief technology officer, and you may get a coding assessment or something that again looks at how you do deductive reasoning. So I think the point here is that the assessment questions that you get asked should be applicable to the roles that you're going to be applying for, and you should be assessed against those. What you described previously was a battery of assessments that seemed unrelated, and you were unsure of why you're even doing this, so it's seen as friction. So the world of assessments, certainly at SHL, has changed significantly over the past couple of years.
Well, not that you need the validation. I want to give you a little bit anyway, but not that you need it for me. But we actually did a survey and talked to candidates themselves, because I'd always heard anecdotally when I was working in HR and recruiting, having to deliver these assessments for certain types of roles. I'd always heard like people hate these; they're going to drop out of the process. And what I found in the study was candidates hate general assessments that have no tie to their actual job. They can't see a line of sight between the two. But as you were saying a minute ago, the outcomes-based approach, when they see some sort of clear line of sight between the things they're doing in that assessment and the things they'd be doing in the actual job, the tasks, the types of skills, if they're being assessed on those types of things that are related, they feel better. Even if they don't get the job, they feel better about the process because they feel like they've had a chance to really show what they can do. I had a chance to demonstrate my very best, and I was evaluated on my very best that I had to offer, instead of being evaluated purely based on how you structured your resume or how you wrote your objective statement on your CV. And those things, you and I know, are not predictive of someone's ability to do the job. So it was really interesting to see that in the data that candidates don't mind if there's some sort of connection there. So again, I thought that was really intriguing to hear you've seen that on your side of the practical side of it, actually delivering these to candidates. They appreciate that perspective. Employers probably appreciate, hey, let's find out if they can actually do the job before we make an offer to them. It seems logical, but it's come a long way.
The
like
other
you said.
thing is that candidates want the process to be fair. So, you mentioned earlier, they want to be known that I'm being assessed fairly against other candidates. There's no bias coming in, and it is, assessments done properly and relevant to the job with the validity behind it is the fairest, unbiased way of working in terms of candidate selection. And I think the final thing that I'd like to add, Ben, is we're also considering about what about the candidates who don't get the job. So out of 20 candidates, if one candidate gets the role or the job, what about the 19 they've gone through this process? So what we're doing, and what we've started doing recently, is actually providing some feedback, if organizations are willing to give it, on the candidates that didn't give the role. They could go through a behavioral type assessment, and the competencies an organization were looking for may be different from the kind of competencies that the candidate has. But I think it's always good to give some feedback. So we've gone down this feedback route, which seems to be exciting a number of our clients, where even the 19 that didn't get the role out of the 1 out of the 20 who did, we would say, look, here's some real strengths. Here's 3 strengths about you, 3 areas of strength in your competencies. And here's some 3 things that you could develop. It could be anything from your sort of ability to execute in detail or to read in detail, to all your strategic thinking. But I think rewarding people for going through the process and actually also rewarding them for going through an assessment, I think it will play more and more an essential part of how organizations recognize their brand. And actually, we're actually looking at things not only, which is a completely different world from where we were. The assessment starts with the candidates also assessing the organization, and the candidate is assessing the organization straight from, where they're recognizing the brand. So now we've really sort of gone into the whole sort of analytics piece. It plays quite a big part in how we think. And we're even feeding back organizations, the way you're representing your brand, we're seeing a lot of drop-off at the beginning of the assessment, or the way you're representing, the role, we're seeing drop-offs or real interest. And obviously, our traditional assessments, we're going to be sort of saying, did we see any drop-offs in the candidate engagement during the assessment? And then the feedback, are we seeing sort of improved net performance scores for you as an organization by giving candidates something back, a feedback loop at the end of it?
That's pretty impressive to think that an employer is not just, when they come, I would imagine a lot of them think we're buying an assessment. We're buying a discrete unit, and this transaction is going to happen, and we're going to find out more with the candidate. But to learn that you are actually going steps beyond that to try to create this better insight into the process overall, but also on the candidate side, trying to partner with employers to give the candidates a better insight into themselves and more confidence in the hiring process the next time they go to apply for a job. If they didn't get it, hey, they know what to emphasize next time because there's strengths, there's some actual data there, some objective information that helps them to decide what to do and what to approach next. I think that's a really powerful way of looking at this overall process, and how that might be another area where this has shifted in the market as a whole, right? Because the employer is not just getting the assessment and it's packaged and it's done and whatever happens, but you're actually going into the service side and helping to create this better experience overall and partnering with them to really help candidates feel better about not just the process they went through, but the employer that put them through that. And for for the candidate, they might not know, SHL as a brand, but they knew they took that assessment with XYZ company, and they perceive however you treated them to be how the company treated them and how they felt cared for. So that's a really powerful piece of that process, I think, that we call it human-centric hiring, but I think you really touched on some of those key points of that. That's really, really intriguing. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I've been saving this one because I'm really curious about this, and I've written the book on AI and how it can be used for hiring and everything else. It is everyone's favorite buzzword, it seems like. I'm calling 2020 the year of practical AI, though. It's about really getting beyond just the buzzword and using actual use cases to solve real problems. How is AI impacting the assessment space in some practical ways?
So if you take our skills assessments, and we have assessments around coding, so really assessing somebody's technical ability, read and write code and spot errors. Now, traditionally, the way you would assess this is you would, without AI, which we've applied to it, you would, do a problem statement, and then you would ask somebody to write code. They would compile the code, and then you would look at the output of the code. Now, if they were unable to compile the code because, it had an error in it, the code would fall over, and you would immediately reject that candidate. We've got this whole mantra of, don't let the good ones, disappear. So, anybody who's out there coding, and, coding is a structure, it's a language, like any other language. And like a language, it has a certain grammar to it and a certain, structure to it. So somebody may have just missed a comma or added a comma in the wrong place in their code, and that caused the code to fall over, and you rejected a really good candidate who may have had written some brilliant code, but because they've made one flaw, it caused their code to fall over. What our AI technology has really started looking at is, what about if you could just read the code like you would read, an assessment, or you would read, a different skill, and you could actually structure the code and structure the assessment and score going, actually, this is really good code. So we've actually applied AI technologies, machine learning technologies, using sort of, I don't want to go down the buzzword route, but using sort of natural language processing that can actually score somebody's code. We could apply now this to languages, and we're applying it now to some of our traditional development center work or assessment center work. So I quite agree with you. I think AI became a buzzword, but it didn't really have a use case in a lot of the HR spaces. I think HR have sort of, now looking at it sort of, let's start with the problem statement first. The problem statement may be that you've got a huge campaign to hire, it's the Christmas season and you want to hire a lot of people at your retail organization. You haven't got enough HR folks to assess everybody, and you haven't got enough HR folks to look at their resumes. How could AI actually help you there, sort of, by automatically scoring and sort of, based on the answers? So I quite agree with you. I think the way we're looking at AI is we start with the application first, and then we go, how could AI actually either improve, which we don't always look for because it's still linear, or how would you sort of radically think of, what you're trying to achieve using AI technologies in a different way. So that's how we're looking at AI. We've got multiple use cases. I'm happy to go through multiple, but I thought the coding one was quite interesting, how we look at skills assessments.
Absolutely. Like you said, there could be a single character in that entire snippet of code that someone puts together, and just because they miss a single character, it would kick them out of the process. But they might ultimately be the best candidate out of the entire bunch because they had everything else correct. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I love, again, I'm always thinking of those areas where humans are prone to error, right? It's easy to look at. It's a very structured sort of approach, and anywhere where those sorts of things kind of come together is a really good opportunity. There's typically a good problem statement we can craft out of that, as you were saying, for AI to try to tackle that problem and do it in a better and more level way than a human could by just coming in there and trying to do that manually. So I love that example. It's a really good one, and I think that's an awesome way to kind of wrap this up and reinforce this idea that as you were saying, right, AI can do some really powerful things. It can do amazing things in the hiring process. We also talked about the human piece, though, and how important that is. To assessments are all about getting to understand the human behind that resume and what do they bring and what are the capabilities and everything else. I think this has been really a fun conversation to dig into those sides of it and bring it back around to creating more personal experiences. If someone wants to learn more about SHL, the work the team is doing, what's the best way to do that?
I would start by going on shl.com. You can see a lot of thought leadership pieces written by our psychologist on the future of sort of some of the outcome-based assessments that I talked about, where we're connecting assessments to business drivers. We're trying to bring HR and business leaders closer together and help organizations achieve their goals by, hiring the right talent. So I would start there. You could go to our Twitter page if you want to sort of, provide any feedback, but shl.com is a really good starting point. There's a whole wealth of information that's absolutely free to anybody who just wants to look a bit more around what are assessments and how could they benefit my organization, to actually how could SHL help our organization grow, attract the right talent and develop the right talent.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Jora, this has been a fun conversation for me. I hope everybody else is really, again, I've got a lot of notes here. I hope everyone else has taken the time to gather some of these insights too, though, because I think there's so much here we can learn about how to create a better hiring process and to treat people more humanly throughout it. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for allowing me to speak towards your podcast. I know you've got a great following, and I hope that this was valuable for the people who listen in.
Awesome. Excellent. To everyone else, thank you again for joining us today on We're Only Human. This has been Eubanks, your host, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.